Okay, so now we have our trunk. We want to begin by adding some branches. So we will just right click in the network view and add branches. Now, if for any reason it isn't connected to the node that you want it to be, you can just drag and drop it on top of that node. So let me just drop this here. We now have some nice branches. And let's take a look at some of the settings now we have these branches. So if we go to the generation tab, we'll take a look at some of these modes. And there are only really 3 that I use. These 3 will achieve most of what you need within SpeedTree. So that is interval, bifurcation, and proportional steps. If we stick with interval for now and take a look at what it's doing, we can change the frequency or amount, the count, and this relates to how many we have going around the tree. We have the spread, which relates to how the branches are spread up and down the trunk. And we have the spiral, which we can see top down. Now the spiral is one way that we can break this up, because as you can see, without it, they tend to group. And that relates to this align style. So we have group and we have individual. If we hit balance, it tries to fill in the gaps. But really, to break this up, we want to change the spiral, just to add a little bit more randomization there. Now we also have proportional steps, and this is what we would use if we want to create something like a pine tree. So if I increase the number, we increase the number of branches around the tree, and then we can increase the steps to get some more. So next up is bifurcation, and this is really for when we are beginning to create more branches along the initial branching. What this does is it begins to add some more branches based on the kinks and the bends within the branch itself. Now this is realistic, as if we bring up a branch as a quick example, you can see it's quite natural when the branch bends at any extreme angles, we have these other branches that kick out and begin to grow. So we will come back and look at that once we want to add a little bit more. Let's go through some of the settings that we have here. I'll switch this back to interval. We have first and last, which is just where the branches start and end. We have, of course, rotation, position, and size scale. Here we also have sync, and we can demonstrate this a little better as we can see the branches go in or out of the trunk. At the bottom we have extend parent, and this just adds another branch onto the previous nodes or any breaks in the previous node. If I switch this on as an example. Finally, here we have the knockout amount, and this just randomly removes some branches. On the spine tab, we have the length. We have its percentage of the parent. In this case, these branches will always be 60% smaller than the previous node. We have again the start angle and the gravity. Ancestor just will now try to follow the trunk in whichever direction that is facing. We can increase the straightness based on this. Adds a little bit more kinks into the tree, or into the branches. The twist, of course, will twist it along its length. And we have the prune, so we can remove some branches top to bottom, or bottom to top. And also remove any branches that clip with the ground. We can still use noise here, as we can introduce some of this late noise. And also any breakages along the branches. And when they happen, or where they happen. If we go to skin, this is where we can change the thickness again, like we did with the trunk. And also the welding. So here we can take a look at what this does. If I turn on the wireframe, you can see we have this extra piece of geometry here, and this just smooths the connection between the branch and the trunk or any subsequent branches that come later. But from the distance that we see these trees, this added geometry just complicates things, so we will just remove this for the moment. And finally, at the bottom we have the splits, and again we'll come back to this as it doesn't really work for this type of tree at the moment. Just to cover a little bit more of the displacement, let me just turn this back off. We can of course add more or less to the branches. We can change its frequency along the axis, U or V. We can introduce some higher frequency. Or at the bottom, change the flares. Now this pertains to the connection between the branch and the previous node, or the trunk and the ground. So if I take a look here and switch back to the trunk and go to the flares down here, we can increase the flare at the bottom or add in some more noise. And we just have the radius, the scale of the noise, where it happens to start and end on the trunk, whether or not we add some sharpness into this noise, and then the angle around the tree. Okay, so what we would do next is just continue to add branches, except this time we will add some bifurcating branches.